Got a 20-inch yard machine. I got this for free about 16 months ago, and I posted a video showing how I cleaned out the fuel tank and the carburetor, and I got it running well. Now the engine is surging. I thought it may be a dirty air filter, so I'll replace that. Got a brand new one, but it is still surging. So we're going to take the carburetor off, clean it out, and hopefully fix the problem. Carburetor is located behind the air filter, and to get this piece of the air filter housing off, there are two 8mm bolts on the outside and two 7mm on the inside. And then pull that piece straight out. Disconnect the fuel line. It's just plastic tubing, clear plastic tubing, and I put that on 16 months ago, and it's kind of a rigid plastic, so I can't just clamp down on it to stop that fuel from flowing out. That's why I have to drain the tank. Tank is drained. That looks good, no trash or water. Now you can pull the carburetor off the engine, and the only thing holding it on is this linkage. So to get that off, I got to turn the carburetor to the side because there's a little S-bend, little curve in that linkage. See it right there on the top. And one other thing that happened right here, you need to watch out for that, this O-ring, and there's a lock ring up here I'm going to slide off. Sometimes the O-ring and the lock ring do come off like that, but we are going to put them back in the right position on the carburetor so that when we slide the carburetor back on, everything will be good. I'm going to clean the outside of the carburetor with some brake clean before I take it apart. And now on the underside of the carburetor, to get the bowl off so we can get to the main jet and clear that out, there are two 7mm bolts. And actually they're screws, not bolts. And then this bottom piece, that bowl should come off, and you might have to pry that off, so let me get a flathead screwdriver. That gas looks clean, doesn't look like any dirt down in there. Now we want to get the float and needle valve out. We need to pry this bar up, and the needle valve is on the underside right there. And right there in the center, that's the main jet. That's usually where the problem is, but that does not look like it's clogged up. You see that piece will pop out, and then this center piece, that will pry up. So we're going to clean all these passageways out with carb spray, also clean out the carburetor. You want to be careful not to get carb spray on this bowl gasket because that may cause it to expand, and if that happens you may not get a good seal between the bowl and the carburetor, and that may cause a gas leak. So I got it all cleaned out with carb spray, but I want to show you something else that you should also do, which is clean it out with wire. But before I do that, right here on this cartridge, right there in that hole, that is the main jet, and I'm going to put a flashlight on top. When I cut the light on, see how you can see light through that hole? That's telling me that the main jet is clear. I also want to check down through this tube, and you can see light all the way through, and the one in the middle, you can see through that one as well. And with the wire, just take a small piece of wire, and maybe you should do this before you use carb spray. You run the wire through and then finish up with a carb spray instead of starting with carb spray like I did. But in any event, whatever order you choose, do the carb spray and get a piece of wire. I'm going to run it through this one as well, and you can see where it comes out down there at the bottom. So that's clear. On the emulsion tube, which is this piece in the middle, there are holes that go all the way through. So you can run the wire through those holes. You see it coming out on the other side. So use the carb spray and the wire to make sure that the main jet is clear, because the main jet, that is where gasoline is picked up in the bowl of the carburetor, and if that's clogged up, the gas is not picked up and it doesn't make it to your carburetor, and your engine's not going to start or it's not going to run right. So now reassembling the cartridge, this piece just slides on. Make sure it slides on all the way, and then it goes in just like this with the O-ring to the outside. And you really can't put this in the wrong way, or it won't go all the way down if you put it in the wrong way, I should say. It won't go flush. And now the float and the needle valve goes down in that hole, and this can be kind of tricky because sometimes that needle valve will fall off. Once you get it in, you snap that pin in on both sides. And now putting the bowl back on, this raised rectangular section, that fits over where the main jet is. So that will go in all the way. If you have it the wrong way, like this, it's not going to go all the way down. So it goes on like that. And you tighten up your two 7mm screws. And now the last thing before we put the carburetor back on, we'll reinstall the O-ring. That goes in first, and then the snap ring. And then I'm going to put a little bit of silicone on my finger and wipe that onto the O-ring to help it slide onto the engine easier. So we are ready to put the carburetor back on. First thing to go on is that linkage, and if you pull it towards you, that'll give you more room to hook it on. And remember, I had to turn the carburetor sideways to get it off, so I got to turn the carburetor sideways to get it back on. Just like that. Now that little white piece slides into that groove, and then you line it up in the back where the O-ring and lock ring are. Get that lined up so the carburetor will slide onto the engine. Make sure you push it all the way on. Might take a little bit of force. Now let's get the fuel line on. And I'll need another zip tie on that to hold it on. And now on the air filter assembly, make sure that breather hose, make sure it slides into the back. And you might have to get a hand behind there to make sure it slides on. Now the 4 screws, 2 7s and 2 8s. And when your engine's surging like that, usually it's either it's searching for air or it's searching for fuel. It's missing one of those. Dirty air filter or dirty carburetor, that's usually what the problem is. And a zip tie on the fuel line, and then we will try to crank this up. 2 things to add before I try and start it. If you're having trouble getting that breather tube connected to the back of the carburetor, 3 8mm bolts hold that top cover on. So you take those bolts off and remove the cover with the starter assembly, and you can get to that line in the back. And the last thing, down in the fuel tank, see that screen down there in the bottom? You need to check to make sure that is not clogged up, because that screen being clogged up is going to restrict the fuel that's able to get to your carburetor, and lack of fuel can cause engine surging. Let's put some fuel in it and start it up. I'm going to put the same fuel that I took out, put that back in the tank so that we know that everything is the same air filter as earlier when I started the video. So we'll know that the only thing I did was clean the carburetor. I did not clean the spark plug, nothing like that. All I did was clean the carburetor. So let's see if that worked. And yes, it did. The carburetor was the problem. Although I didn't see anything clogged up, cleaning it out fixed the surging, hunting issue with this engine. If your engine is hunting, surging, not running evenly, check out your carburetor. That might be the problem.